Hello, my name is Dahlia,
And I'm Allie.
and welcome to Navigate the Now. Today's episode is part of one of two-part series. We're joined by Father Carl, an Episcopal priest based in Sunnyside, Queens. In this first half, he shares his love story, how he met his wife, and how their relationship has impacted his journey to priesthood. We ask him pretty big questions, like how can he be both a priest and a father squared, if you will. And then also, Allie and I reflect on our own distinct relationships with religion, faith, and spirituality. We will like to take a moment to dedicate this episode to our loved ones who've made an impact on us. Specifically for me, my mother, Estela Laurencio. I thank her for laying the foundation of my spiritual journey and faith in God.
And for me, I am dedicating this to my grandparents who really helped teach me spiritually, but beyond that, of what it means to be a good person.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
They both have passed on, so pour one out for the homies.
Pour one out for the homies.
Much love to them. I carry them with me every day, so
I love that. I know my mom will be listening, so I love you, Mommy.
And also, if you've been enjoying our content, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, turn on notifications. And we are on Instagram at navigatethenow, just like our show title. That is our handle. Our email is the same. If you have a question or you want to reach out, navigatethenow@gmail.com.
Yep. All right, y'all. Enjoy. Hello and welcome back, everybody. This is Dahlia.
And this is Allie.
And welcome to Navigate the Now. Today we have our third guest, Father Carl. A little bit about Father Carl. Pronouns are he, him, is an Episcopal priest currently gathering the new Episcopal Mission in Sunnyside. His passion is to help create spaces where people feel seen and known, where they're open to awe and wonder, their pain is held and their gifts are cherished, where they feel empowered and supported to grow into a greater integrity. Before becoming a priest, Carl worked in the restaurant industry and as a teacher's aide for students with disabilities. He also earned a PhD in English literature and taught college English in 2 New Jersey state prisons. His call to Episcopal priesthood was kickstarted by falling in love with an atheist, the audio journalist and artist Meg Kramer. They moved to Sunnyside in the summer of 2021, and their daughter Judy joined the interfaith family in February 2022. Welcome, Father Carl.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure and honor to be here.
Yeah, yes. I'm so happy to have you on the show with us today.
Yes,
Let's do
Dahlia has really wanted you to come on, Father Carl.
All right.
For
Well,
sure.
Thanks for blowing me up here, Dahlia.
Yeah,
and I will try not to
Yeah.
disappoint.
Last weekend we had Zara on, and we were speaking about mutual
Oh.
aid. Yeah.
Awesome.
And I told them that we were interviewing you, and they were super excited to listen to the episode.
Yes.
So do
Well,
not fail them.
Great community
Father Carl.
members. I'll take this very seriously now. Yes. Taking it to 11 here.
Thank you.
Nice.
Appreciate it.
And before we get started, we do our community agreements. And at the end, Father Carl will ask you if you agree and if you have any that you'd like to add, or if you'd like to add on to one, which is common. And so for our listeners, our community agreements are how we show up together. Number 1 is that we are speaking in draft. It doesn't have to be a polished thought, or it's not a final thought. We can always go back and change what we think or change our beliefs. Number 2, assume everyone is doing their best. And remember that most people have good intentions. Number 3, not here to be right, but get it right. 4 is that we're present and being active listening, which we talked about this last week, not just listening to respond. Next is be mindful of speaking space and how much time we're taking up. That's for us, by the way. That is not for you, Father Carl.
Take up all the time.
Noted.
That is not for you. And this is a space to learn and grow. And last but not least is our most important is that we have fun.
So you better have fun. That's
Yeah.
basically.
Okay. I will have fun. I
Yeah.
really appreciate these community agreements, and looking them over, I just, this is a space to learn and grow. And so many of these other feed into that. Those kinds of spaces are so rare and precious these days. I think I know that I find myself in lots of spaces where it's kind of expected that you've already arrived at some final version that everybody is supposed to already understand. And if you're not there, or you haven't got it all sorted out, or there's loose threads, it's kind of like a shamey space. And it's, I can't think of worse conditions under which to learn and grow. That you feel like you're not supposed to be doing it, and you feel like there's punishment waiting if anybody finds out. I think there's so much grace and generosity built into these, and I feel really grateful to be a part of it.
All right.
Nice.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for saying that. I definitely agree. The idea of a lot of there's different spaces where you show up and people kind of expect to be almost like your perfect self and not, I don't know, not say things that make people feel uncomfortable or whatnot. And it really is everyday time to learn and grow. And the only way to do that is to feel safe to mess something up and come back to, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, today's episode, we're going to discuss, well, we have Father Carl, so we're going to talk about religion and we're going to talk about politics. And I think that that's part of the reason why I'm so excited to have you on. I met Father Carl at the iftar that Zara hosted at the church. I remember Father Carl when I think we first met. I asked you a question. Now I can't remember exactly what question, but it just started a great conversation, and it felt really refreshing to be in a space and to speak about religion, to speak about God, to speak about faith in a way that wasn't like shaming others. And I think that that's really important. And I personally haven't really seen or felt that in a long time. And before we get into the nitty-gritty, before we get into the religion and politics and all this good stuff, let's start with your story. Tell us a little bit about your story, Father Carl, how you got here, what shaped you, what kind of drew you to the work that you're currently doing. Whatever you want to share, floor is yours.
Okay. I will be mindful of how my speaking space and how much time I'm taking up. I will take that upon myself all the same. Well, first, I'm so glad that conversation that we had on the steps there at the church at the wonderful iftar felt inviting and open. That's the way I want to show up, and that's the vibe that I want people to feel whenever they're in that church space, knowing very well that that's not necessarily what people are expecting or what they have experienced in the past in other church spaces. So that's really encouraging, Dahlia, to me.
You're doing a good job. You're doing a good job, sir.
So I grew up in Rochester, New York, and I grew up in a family for whom church was really important. My grandparents and my great-grandparents had been instrumental in starting the church that we attended, and it was not an Episcopal church. It was called Trinity Covenant Church. It was part of the Evangelical Covenant Church, which was basically a group founded by a group of Swedish immigrants to the United States in the late 19th century. And I actually have learned some new things about this tradition just in the last year from talking to my great aunt, who is still living at 97 years old. Her light remains undimmed. But the folks who came from Sweden and started this were people who in Sweden had been really kind of dissatisfied or disenchanted with the established Church of Sweden. There was a state church, still is, which was for these folks too ceremonial. And these people really wanted to focus on the Bible. There's a lot of parallels actually with the Puritans who came to the United States on the Mayflower in the 17th century, and the Church of England as it existed then. They had many parallel complaints with the state church and wanted to do things on their own. So these folks happened to be part of these waves of migration coming to the U.S., and they started these churches and started this network of churches called the Evangelical Covenant Church. The upshot of my experience of this, as a kid, was that this was a fairly small church, maybe 35 or 40 people there on a Sunday. Every one of them knew my name. I knew their names. I knew they loved me. I felt that love. And, you know, in Sunday school, when the teacher said stuff like, okay, everybody, so God is love, I was like, yeah, that makes total sense to me, because that's what I feel when I'm here. When we gather, I feel suffused by the love and care of this community. So obviously, the being, the reality that we're dedicated to is about that. And I continue to be so grateful for that. And actually I'm like in a season of kind of like renewed gratitude for that after a long period of feeling some hurt as it relates to this tradition, because by the time I got to middle and high school, I was starting to ask questions that I figured out that they didn't have a place in this particular church community, this tradition. And I was asking out of real curiosity, out of real desire. My great-grandmother told me that I was going to become a pastor when I was 3 years old.
Oh, wow.
And that sounded amazing to me, because I feel loved. I'm loving this. I love these songs that we sing together. I love this sense of community. And because this is a fairly like intellectual, theologically rich tradition, you know, the pastor is the person who's supposed to have all the answers to everybody's questions.
Right.
And like, I'm thinking, I've got a lot of work to do if I'm going to stand up at the front someday. So, Sunday school teacher, confirmation leader, what is the deal with the fact that there seems to be two distinct creation stories in Genesis chapter 1 and in Genesis chapter 2? Which one is the right one? I mean, I was at 13 years old. I'm sure some of this had an edge to it. I'm sure I was being an asshole, as like teenagers are. But I also really wanted to know, and thankfully nobody like slapped my hand and told me I was a sinner for asking. But I did get the very clear understanding that we don't talk about that here.
We don't ask questions.
Yeah. And that made me more and more frustrated. And by the time that I graduated from high school, I was like, I'm done with this. This is over. And that began the period that I understood at the time to be like my time of not being religious for the next 12, 15 years. Which, in hindsight, is kind of like a hilariously erroneous, mistaken self-understanding, because look at the receipts. I was going to church at least once a week throughout that whole time. I was going on pilgrimages. But you
were like, I'm not religious.
Going to monasteries on multi-day retreats, but I'm not religious, you know?
You were spiritual.
I might have said that. I might have said that. But I think coming out of this experience in the church I grew up in, I always expected that pattern to be repeated. Like, oh, there's gonna come a time, no matter how good this feels when I am kind of getting settled or experimenting, learning about this church community that I'm stepping into. There's going to come a time where I'm told that there's a part of myself that I need to check at the door. And I don't want to feel that ever again. So I'm going to just keep one foot out the door always.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I found myself living in New York City, looking for another church to have one foot in, one foot out of, and had become curious about the Episcopal Church, that something shifted in that. And as you mentioned in that little bio there, the ironic and beautiful and, for me, miraculous catalyst in that was falling in love with my wife, Meg, who was and is an atheist.
I was going to ask, she's still an atheist?
Yeah. She has not been convinced, and I have not been trying. Not my style.
I love
but that. I guess this is very important to me, so I'm eager to share it. But felt like I wasn't going to become a pastor. How could I be a pastor if I'm not religious? So I was going to do this plan B thing, which was to become a college professor. You know, you get to kind of do a lot of overlapping stuff, talk about big, beautiful ideas, sit with people as they sort through hard questions, have the kind of discussions that I wish we had been having in my confirmation class. And so I ended up in this PhD program in English literature. And there was so many cool things that made possible. Teaching in New Jersey State prisons, being part of studio art classes. I was trying to soak up as much as I could. And it was pretty clear on a gut level that I didn't want to be an academic. So, but I didn't know what else to do. And I had sort of like resigned myself to being kind of this very sophisticated, melancholic, very handsome, lonely academic that, you know,
Right.
would be the talk among the undergraduates, but was always sort of at a remove. You know, it's a type. And I was like, yeah, that's probably going to be me. Because I had also written off at that time finding my person. And I had sort of thought, okay, this is going to be a lonely existence. That's how it is for me. And I came up to Brooklyn to see some old friends, and they had a party, and I ended up talking to this woman in the kitchen all night, and I just don't want the conversation to be over. And I had never wanted to live in New York City before then, and now it's like, how can I move to New York City? How soon can I get here? Because this is now the center of the universe for me. And we fell in love, and it was wonderful, and it also broke me. It broke my heart open. Again, wonderful. And ouch, because this is like ruining the life that I had sort of planned or understood or resigned myself to. And now I have to do this very vulnerable and hard thing of hoping that she doesn't dump my sorry ass. And now I'm sort of so dependent on her, on this continuing. I think in a big part of this being open to this call to the priesthood was that my heart was in this kind of raw and broken open place. So I had kept going back Sunday after Sunday to this Episcopal church in Park Slope, and I realized, without deciding it, oh, I have both feet in here. When did that happen? And not too long after that, I had this experience that sort of helped me see the ways in which many different experiences I'd had up to that point made sense in the context of a call to the priesthood that I hadn't had a context for, hadn't had language for. And that freaked me out, just like falling in love had. But I was like deep enough in love and felt so alive in it, and had some practice moving through the fear and discomfort that I was feeling about that. I was like, oh, maybe I could do that with this priesthood thing. Maybe this feeling of aliveness is something that I can trust more than those voices that are telling me to protect myself at all costs. So then I had to have a talk with Meg and say, hey, listen, and we had been talking about getting married at this point. It's like 2016. Would you still want to get married if I didn't become a college professor and instead became an Episcopal priest? And you got to picture this, me like sobbing as I'm saying this. We're at this restaurant where we had one of our first dates, and I just cannot keep it together. But in one of the most precious moments of my whole life, she was like, hey, you know, I see the way that you come alive when you talk about this stuff, and that's not how you talk about your dissertation. And I think you would be good at this. How could I not like want this for you?
That's a wonderful partner.
Feeling a little emotion right now about this, you know, but
it's making me emotional.
and you know, yeah, so Meg's not a Christian, but that's such a deeply Christian move as I understand it. You are different from me. Stay different. Keep on doing the thing that helps you flourish on this journey that you're on. How can I be a companion to you in that? That is that is a Christ-like move coming from somebody who doesn't share that language. And that's been an important tether point for me throughout all of this. It's like, all right, we've got all these things that traditionally have all these traditional connotations of, oh, this is what a Christian person is or does or believes or blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, I've got a really important model for, again, deeply like Christ-like living and acting. And this person doesn't check any of those other boxes. So maybe we need to kind of like rethink what the boundary markers are here.
That's a beautiful love story.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful love story of two people coming together and then also finding yourself.
Yeah. And, you know, we need each other to find ourselves. We can't find ourselves on our own. That happens in relationship, that happens in community. Sometimes in these very intense ways with lovers and partners and the people that we call our people. Sometimes it's with people who we have a lot of friction with and people who we need to respond to that if we had it our way, like they would not be in the picture at all. But the question of how we're going to respond with integrity in these relationships, that's how we become the people that we are and keep on becoming.
Yeah, I love that.
You know, the thought that keeps coming to my mind right now is, well, doing the podcast and having the few guests that we've had on and doing the research and all these different things. One of the themes is how do we move forward in this new like way of living with people, with others who are very different. And I think that your story with your wife is a very beautiful representation of how that can be very possible. You know, showing up in this current state, right? In this new world. I don't know if I keep saying new world, but it's different than back in the day, right? Like
a lot of it feels pretty new. Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that.
Yes, thank you.
So you share, about how you arrived to where you're at today, and also shout out to Meg for being amazing. I have yet to meet her, but I'm looking forward to meeting her one day. Bringing it to Sunnyside. Tell us a little bit about what is it that you're doing here in this community, Episcopal Church. Actually, before you start there, one of the questions that I wanted to ask when I first met you is that how could you be a priest, Father Carl, and have a kid? That kind of blew my mind. Because
don't tell anyone I have a child. Don't tell anyone.
Father squared.
Fathered square. I love that. And I said I grew up Catholic, so the only priests that I know are Catholic priests. Right?
Yeah. We hope they don't have children.
We hope they don't have children.
A great questions. This is a little word about the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church here is in the United States is a descendant from the Church of England. So the Episcopal Church in the United States, the Anglican Church of Canada, the Anglican Church in New Zealand, in Australia, in South Africa, in Kenya. There are all these churches that still exist and are thriving in their own ways and in their own contexts that were planted in those places by colonizers from England, part of the British Empire. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that is exciting to me about being part of this tradition in this time is that seeing all the ways that those different churches in former British colonies are grappling with colonization as part of their DNA, a part of the legacy that they have received. There are many efforts in different contexts to decolonize and to allow this life-giving and liberating vision of Jesus to speak back to and critique the foundations, the origins of their own churches. So the Episcopal Church is part of that, and that work is uneven and unfinished and probably always will be. But the Church of England ultimately chose that sort of more moderate route, and I think that carries forward into contemporary practice in this sort of like desire to preserve the gifts of ancient wisdom that have been passed down to us and preserve those parts of tradition that are still life-giving, while also paying attention to new discoveries in modern knowledge, science, paying a lot of attention to liberation movements, whether that's feminism or the abolition of slavery movement, the rise of queer life in our public consciousness and the embrace of that. So this is the balancing act, the continual discernment that happens when the Episcopal Church is, from my understanding, like sort of like most grounded in its own history and its own integrity. Asking always, what's the ancient wisdom that speaks to this moment? And what are the new discoveries? What are the voices that need to be lifted up that we need to hear in harmony with that tradition? All of that, a long way of saying that in the 16th century, people who had been Catholic priests in England, now the Church of England, they get married. And ever since, Anglican priests have had the option of being married. And I'm so grateful that you can be married and have a kid. And now very grateful that my queer colleagues can be out and married to the people that they love and be a part of families in all their many wonderful forms.
That's a beautiful thing. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now I know how you can be father squared.
Now you know.
Yeah.
All right. So now going back to your work, your vision for the Episcopal Mission in Sunnyside.
Yeah. Just to start with logistics. Meg and I lived in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn for 6 years, during which time I was finishing my PhD. I went to seminary at Union Theological Seminary, which is up in Morningside Heights, kind of across the street from Columbia Teachers College. And part of that was during the pandemic. And there was already some writing on the wall that the life of the Episcopal Church was changing fast and would continue to change. And that was mostly sort of in the context of these kind of panic-inducing numbers around church attendance and how precipitously they were declining. And then, of course, you stir in a global pandemic and all of the many forms of upheaval that meant. And it's like, okay, the institutional church that I'm stepping into as an ordained person is probably going to change a lot during my lifetime, during the time that I'm living and working as a priest. Is that something that I want to relate to through the lens of anxiety and fear? Or do I want to be one of the people who is seeking new forms of faithfulness in this moment, taking on as a creative and spiritual adventure to ask how this tradition might speak in new forms, in new ways, in new organizational structures. So coming out of seminary, I made a proposal to the person on the bishop's staff who is responsible for job placements, for lack of a better term. And I sort of shared this with her, and she dismissed it out of hand. You're going to keep working at the church you've been interning at as a seminarian, which is in Eastern Queens, Zion Episcopal Church. It's a wonderful community. And I said, okay, that's your prerogative. And we were then having moved on to this part of the contract conversation where it's like, well, about where we were going to live. And just kind of as like out of the blue, as in like a little lightning bolt, this person was like, oh, well, would you want to live in Sunnyside? The church there was closed in 2020, and the rectory has been vacant for the last 18 months. And I was like, like a vacant apartment of a church that closed, that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. Would we be moving in with a Rat King as our roommate?
Yeah.
But this place is beautiful. We were psyched to be able to live here in Sunnyside Gardens. I guess at the very end of that conversation with the staff person, she said, yeah, if you want to like think about new and creative ministries, I guess you could think about doing that in Sunnyside. And this is my dream that she's articulating. In hindsight, she wasn't actually listening to what she was saying and completely forgot about this 2 seconds later. But I was like, that's enough permission for me to start thinking about this, dreaming about this.
That's a big challenge ahead of you.
Yeah. I mean, I was working full time at Zion out in Eastern Queens, commuting out there. I'm like, looking around and getting to know the neighborhood a little bit and getting to love the diversity and the families and the sense of community, how much people value this neighborhood as a neighborhood. I'm thinking to myself, well, if the Episcopal Church can't figure out a way to make it work in Sunnyside, we should just hang it up.
Yeah.
But this is part of this very contextual thing that it's been part of my ongoing and very incomplete work in sort of decolonizing my understanding of what the church is and could be. But it's probably not going to look like All Saints, and it's probably not going to look like other Episcopal churches in Cincinnati, much less in New York City.
And that's what you're finding out or trying to find out now by working with the community members.
Exactly. So it's all about building relationships, learning what people are yearning for, seeing what is already alive and happening that we can partner with and join in and nurture and nourish. I really wanted to be clear that whatever's happening here is not restarting All Saints. It's not a reboot of what has come before. I want to have a different relationship to that legacy, which includes a lot of gratitude. But the mission, that's another word that's got a lot of colonial baggage, right? Here, we're coming to you with the good news that you, by definition, lack. And soon enough, you'll realize how indebted you are to us for bringing the light into your darkness. I mean, yuck. But there's another, of course, meaning of mission, which is the thing to which we are dedicating ourselves, the thing to which we are being pushed forward by. And we chose as the mission this a part of this prayer from the Book of Common Prayer. It's, one of my favorites, and it's this prayer at some pretty big moments in the life of the church as part of the Easter Vigil. It's also prayed at ordinations, at my ordination. And the part of the prayer that we picked as our mission is that the whole world would see and know that things which have been cast down are being raised up, and things which have grown old are being made new. And it's I don't know what form this is going to take. I don't know who's going to want to be a part of this. I don't know how we're going to pay our bills down the road. But I don't want to be a part of something that doesn't have this at the center. This curiosity about where things that have been cast down are being raised up, where things that have grown old are being made new. And that's not our job to do. That's not our task list. Oh, go out and make something new. It's more about where is that already happening, and how can we enjoy being a part of that? How can we grow by being in relationship to that? What will that reveal about the stories that we've been telling ourselves that are too small or too brittle? And that's part of my own story as well. Falling in love with Meg, coming back to church, receiving this call to the priesthood. It's my great-grandmother, she was right.
Yeah, I was going to say, she knew something at the age of 3. You're showing some sort of signs.
But it shook out in a way that she could not imagine, and probably would have been totally weirded out by, because the Episcopal Church is a lot like the Church of Sweden that, she thought was superstitious and too Catholic and yucky, So she may not approve, and that's fine. But that was, I have felt that in my body, something that has grown old being made new, something that has been cast down being raised up. I just want to have that feeling. I just want to follow that feeling. And could we gather a community of people that together wanted to follow that feeling with one another and alongside our neighbors.
Hearing you, I hear the passion in your voice. To hear you talk about coming to Sunnyside with the idea of what kind of space to hold for the community, letting the community decide what their spiritual, religious space will look like for them, if that's what they're open to, is making me reflect a bit about my own spirituality, my own religious beliefs. I shared earlier that I was raised Catholic. And I've mentioned in podcasts before that Allie was, with Allie, I've gone to protest, and I've done these things to become a bit more activist, right? Mm-hmm. When I really think about where that foundation comes from, it comes from my mother, and it comes from her faith. I went to Sunday school, or did the whole confirmation, all that jazz, and that spiritual, that religious part of me, it really is a good base of who I am. I have my necklace, I have La Virgen de Guadalupe, and so that's very personal to me and, to my culture and my community. But the one thing that kind of pulled me away from Catholicism was the idea of there's certain groups that aren't, that don't belong, right? Yeah. There was always kind of an underlying feeling of, well, we're feeling better than, or we're better than somebody because, I don't know, and sort of few things, right? If somebody is LGBTQ plus community, if they want to have an abortion, all these things where I just felt like there was such a conflict to have this faith and to believe in the love of Jesus Christ, but then there have this limited, it's conditional, right?
Totally.
We're taught, at least, growing up, is that the love of God, Jesus Christ, is infinite for us. And then at the same time, there's this undertone of, well, there's actually conditions to it. And I've always, there was always a conflict with that. And even with my mom being as religious as she is, she herself also recognizes the beauty in different faiths, in different cultures. And so the next question for you, Father Carl, how do you see what you're trying to bring to this community and kind of looking in this new way of new faith, or is it really new? I don't know. Just what you mentioned of what was old is now new, of where this church, where they stand in bringing in people from marginalized communities.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if I can just riff on this for a second, I'm going to lean into this, try to figure out what I'm saying, speaking in a draft form.
Let's do it.
I think what you're naming there, the way you're putting this, Dahlia, is the way that I often frame this as well, where it's there's these teachings, there's this inheritance from church that it's solid ground for us to stand on. That you and Allie going to a protest together is continuous with what you learned in Sunday school. Mm-hmm. It's an expression of something deep within you that was formed in you in church, in part, in church. And then there's this institutional reality that feels really dissonant with that in many ways. And it's almost, I think, we were talking earlier about my period of time, I can't be religious because I exist outside these organized forms. Right. And many people, talk about being spiritual but not religious, and they often mean something like that. I'm tapped into something that is larger than me, that is supremely valuable, but it's really important to me that it's not the thing that people talk about from a pulpit, because those institutional forms are necessarily corrupting of that good thing. And I'm painting with a broad brush here just for the sort of sake of trying to get this across. But in some ways, it's deeply traditional within the Christian tradition, within the Christian story, the people who understand themselves to be the carriers of that tradition, to have their minds blown that the work of God is undeniably happening among people who are outside their little tribe, outside their in-group, outside their club. You know, we just read in the lectionary this past Sunday this wonderful, amazing story from the book of Acts where the Apostle Peter is sent by the Holy Spirit. He's sent by something that he doesn't understand, doesn't have words for. He shows up at this guy's house because he feels like he needs to be there. And this guy is a Roman centurion named Cornelius. So two things. He's a representative of this oppressive, extractive, exploitative imperial regime that has its boot on the throat of Peter and his people and has recently, quite recently, executed Peter's Lord and Savior, his teacher, his friend, Jesus. Peter has no love for the Romans. Also, Cornelius, he's a Gentile. Jews and Gentiles are not supposed to hang. But Peter finds himself at this guy's front door. The door opens. Cornelius says, "I've been praying that you would come." And what Peter sees is happening is that the Holy Spirit is undeniably present among these people that Peter has spent his whole life seeing as not just different, but dangerous and other, capital O, other. And Peter is drawn across the threshold into that house, and he sits down, he eats with them. The most radical act of sort of like porousness, intercultural exchange that he's been told his whole life is not just different, but spiritually dangerous, not kosher, and frankly, like gross. He sits down and as he says something like, "Who am I to stand in the way of what God is doing?"
Right.
You know, you mentioned La Virgen de Guadalupe. I was really moved in seminary to learn that that first apparition, first appearance of the Blessed Mother in Guadalupe, like that's an appearance of the Mother of God in the form of a mestiza woman. This is a group of colonized people who have in many ways had this Christian tradition forced upon them, who nonetheless say, "Do you know where God is born? Among us." This is ours, the message of liberation and life. It is for us. The people who put it on us, they didn't understand. Those are the moments that I want to claim as the touchstones of this tradition that I want to keep living out.
Yeah.
Which is, you know, it's uncomfortable to say the least because like I like to know what I'm doing. I like to feel like I'm in charge. I like to have answers.
Yeah.
But the question, having this conversation, well, who are we cultivating this community for? And as we talked through it, the question became about who are we willing to be gathered to? Who are we going to meet that says, I have seen the Blessed Mother and she looks like me? Where are people going to tell us that they are experiencing things that have been cast down being raised up and things that have grown old being made new?
Yeah.
Amen.
Can I ask, Dahlia, I really appreciate you naming some of this stuff, part of your own story. Allie, I'm curious about you. Did you grow up in a faith tradition?
Yeah. I feel like I relate with both of you. My mother's side of the family, I'm here in Ohio, and originally I was from here, and my mother's side of the family are Swiss Mennonite who came over, and essentially it sounded very similar, Father Coral, to kind of the description of the story of your own family. And they came over, they fled what was essentially religious persecution, as under how I understand it, or the ability to be what they wanted to be in Switzerland at that time. But ultimately, so here in Ohio, up where they're from, it's a little town called Bluffton, and there's another one there called Pandora. Anyways, those were specifically Mennonite towns, were literally, or Mennonite settlements, I'm sorry. And I'm obviously not Mennonite, but my grandparents were raised Mennonite on my mom's side. My dad's side, I think there was some Lutheran there, maybe some Catholicism, not as strong, not as present. But ultimately, and this is where I also connect with Dahlia, I had my mom's grandparents. They were essentially I mean, I know we all feel this way about our family, but this is something people all around me told me my whole life, kind of outside of my family, they were the nicest and like good-hearted people that I'd ever met in my entire life. And it's gonna make me emotional now. And because they were, and the church that they went to was Presbyterian, and so I don't know how all that transpired, but it did. And my father kind of didn't believe in organized religion as much, so he was there, and it was kind of nice because I didn't feel like religion was super pushed on me, if that makes sense. It was more like I just got brought to things, and I went to Sunday school. I did all those things when I was little. My parents were not super involved with the church or anything, and I even went to a Catholic school for a while, so it's really all over the place. And eventually I kind of had the same journey as you, Father Carl, where then in high school I just had a lot of questions, and I didn't like the rigidity that I felt. I ended up doing confirmation, or when it is at 8th grade, and I had not been that involved in it. And when I did confirmation, I remember the girls were super cliquey and like not welcoming at all, and I was kind of like, well, this is kind of not fun. And so I had the same issues where I had a lot of questions, and eventually I didn't like feeling okay, everybody thinks just as me. And I would say my grandparents didn't make me feel that way, but there were other people that made me feel that way. Not my parents, not my own family, but maybe like extended family, where it was like, this is how we are, right? And I went to a Montessori school, my parent, for a long time when I was young, and which I mean growing up in like Midwestern Ohio. And so my Montessori I went to give you preface, was run by people in Yellow Springs, which it's very radical compared to the rest of this area. So I'm getting that education. And then I have my grandparents who are they're the nicest, most wonderful people. As I got older, I realized, oh, well, we do have some differences, whether it's political or, maybe I'm not that religious. But what I wanted to say was, just like Dahlia, like you said, it was your mom and taking you. It maybe if it wasn't church, it was just my grandparents being the people that they were, which that was part of it. I feel like is the same, where I feel like I'm living what they taught me to be, but in my own way at this point.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I love to travel, and I feel like I've gotten to witness a lot of different religions around the world. And so same thing, I have a deep appreciation for them. I don't know what I gravitate towards more than the other. I'm not atheist, but I would say I don't know if I'd call myself agnostic, but I do have a deep appreciation for all religions. So yeah.
Ellie, are your grandparents still living?
They're not, which is why I got a little emotional.
Yeah. One of the things that I really trust, and I could use theological language about this, but I also just trust this, as a sort of student of human beings. These people who form us, they're with us. And even though your grandparents have died, they are living in you and through you. And I think about my grandparents, my grandmother and my great-grandmother, and, maybe ways that like I in my life and the integrity that I'm seeking after is like, maybe it's a chance for them to heal vicariously through me.
Yeah.
That it's like not my project, not like my, I'm like doing it for them, but in the same way that I feel so much pride and joy as our daughter does her wacko one-person dance party tonight before bed, and I was just like, I could watch this forever, Or she came home from school a couple months ago and she said, Dada, I'm gonna relax and make mistakes. It choked me up, because it's like, oh my gosh, could you go back in time and tell that to the 5-year-old version of me? Can this wisdom help that kid loosen up and let go of some perfectionism or vigilance that he feels like he needs to double down on in order to stay safe? Oh, that's like healing for me to hear you say that. And I guess I've think about that with the people who've come before us, those who are living and those who have died, and however we would name it, I think that is sacred. And it's not sacred just because we're staying within the things that we were taught by these people. It's because like in living them out, like we extend them, we keep it alive, and living things change and they grow and they transform. And
absolutely.
So thank you each for sharing a little bit of those stories.
Yeah, I totally understand what you mean, and I feel like that daily when I carry my grandparents with me. I think sometimes they think like, what the hell is she doing? But then I also think that I'm like, but it comes from them. Like, you know, they were these wonderful, lovely people that cared so much for everybody and made everybody around them feel welcome and wanted. And I'm doing that. It's just, you know, it doesn't look exactly the same.
Totally. I feel the same way about my grandmother, my great-grandmother. Like, like my great-grandmother's, on one hand, she's like, how could he possibly become an Episcopal priest? On the other hand, you know, wherever she is, I feel like she's probably like spending a lot of her time learning TikTok dances and like, you know.
Probably. I wouldn't be surprised.
I don't put much stock in these metaphors we have about the afterlife, but I do get a kick out of that image, you know.
For sure. Their internet is wild.
Yeah, it's very fast. They are living up to the minute. Definitely following all the trends.
Well, that got really heavy and deep and got me in my feels. I'm glad you brought up TikTok too.
You know, we go in, we come out. We go together.
Father Carl, what are you doing to us right now? Like, we were interviewing you, now you're interviewing us. Like, oh my God.
You said it was going to be a conversation, so I took the liberty of asking something I was curious about.
Well, thank you for asking the questions. And, you know, we all shared from different perspectives, and I hope from the listeners, maybe it resonated, maybe it didn't. But there's something to be said that even with the different experiences, to still be able to come together. All right, thank you to our listeners for listening to part one with Father Carl. Wasn't it a good one? It was really enjoyable. Well, I hope you enjoy it. Part 2 is coming out next week, next Friday.
Yes, thank you, Father Carl.
Yes, thank you, Father Carl.
I will add, again, if you are enjoying our content, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Our Instagram is at navigatethenow, and our email is navigatethenow@gmail.com.
Yes, till next time.